Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with, pardon me, talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems and making sure you get the burps out before you read the introduction. That's it was one of those things that was like, oh, it's coming. It's coming. Am I going to be able to get to that breath point? No, I can't, because sometimes bodily functions just function, right?
Mhm. Yes,
Man,
sir. I know. There's been a fair share of outros where I have had a jagged for some reason in the middle of it because I mistimed those breaths too. It's how it goes, right?
yeah. Well,
Part of the craft.
it reminds me of something. There's another one. Let me get a drink here.
No problem.
A little sip of hot coffee. See if that calms the throat back down. Uh, but it reminds me of something. We're going to talk about building a team, and I heard something the other day. Well, I'm listening to this book by Jay Shetty, Think Like a Monk. So I got to give a shout out to Jay. I'm enjoying it. Thank you for doing it, and thank you for reading it with your Indian British accent. Uh, it's quite pleasant, if I might say so myself. Uh, so Jay, give us a shout back, man, when next time you're on your show. Uh, he was talking about being in the not the ashram. They don't call it a monastery, the ashram, as a monk, and how every chore and every person were equal and just as important as the other. And one of the metaphors that one of the teachers used was the organs of the body. And we've talked about that before. I don't remember if we've ever talked about it on the show, but I know, there's that joke of the asshole is part of it, because if you ain't pooping, guess what happens? Everything else. So there's no part of your body that is necessarily more important than another part of your body, and your body functions as a team. That's an interesting thing when you start to think about team organization, team building. How do you set up a team? And really, the point, I think, is that when you have a team, every member of that team is important to the functioning outcome of that team.
Yeah, no, I think what that reminds me of, speaking, first I got to make the joke, inside baseball, of course. Thank you for holding asshole to about the 2:15 mark so we don't get flagged, assuming we have our random memory of 2 minutes on YouTube as the right thing there. But no, the interesting thing that reminds me of was one of my first business ventures at Cobra Valley. And there was a guy who was a board member, and, we had a very limited team, all volunteer basis there. And he told me once, because we got in an argument at a board meeting. I was definitely being a bit of a prick looking back on it, but I was trying to build the business in the direction. I was trying to light a spark, get stuff going, and what the business really needed. And he was pushing back a bunch. And after the meeting, he said, "You know what? How a washing machine gets clothes clean." And I said, "No, sir, how?" And I did not want to talk to this man, as you could guess. And he said, "An agitator." And the agitator in the middle of the washing machine that hits the clothes and beats them all clean and all that kind of stuff. And yes, you need an agitator. But the thing is, when we're talking about building a team, is, do you need the agitator now? Is the problem with your washing machine that you're building that you don't have a big enough thing to hit it and knock it forward? Because I can tell you, looking back on that, I was agitated plenty at that time. The team did not need an agitator, right? So you got to understand what those different functions are. You talk about the organs of the body, you need all of those different pieces. As you go through, some of those things might be really important at a certain point. Some of them might not be very important later. You could point to any, handful of the different organs of the human body or different appendages or whatever that we don't really use anymore, that we have outgrown from our bodies, right? All those things are true inside of your team as well. And I think starting off building the team, you have your core functions of the business. And, obviously those are the clear places to start moving away from what you're naturally skilled at, trying to hire experts that can complement you in those areas and slowly starting to piece together that machine. That's why, and part of the reason that entrepreneurs go so crazy early on in the business and why you probably don't need an agitator is because you are doing all those different jobs. You're running around all over the place there. And then, so you get a generally good idea of how to do each of those. work in each of those positions. And then the way that you really elevate your team's performance is by hiring people who are experts in those areas that you know enough about to get it going. You can hand them the playbook that you've been working on, but they're going to take it and not just take it and do what you've been doing and copy your processes, but they're going to grow with the role. And I think that's a really great way of looking at it, is the growth that comes inside of that ecosystem, inside of the body, whatever kind of metaphor you want to work with, whatever that system is that you're building inside of your business. You want to plug people into it who are ready to grow with the capacity of the business, just like a human body would grow.
Mm. Yeah. And it's made me think of a couple of things. One, are there really any unnecessary parts of the body? Because fairly recently we've discovered that the appendix, that everybody used to just think, just take your appendix out, is actually helping with your immune system.
I hadn't heard that actually.
No, it wasn't that long ago. We discovered that whatever that little thingy does, it like puts stuff into your body that helps with the immune system. The other one that I was thinking of, and this kind of in that same sense, is wisdom teeth. You know, everybody except for me, that's why I'm so damn smart and so wise, because I still got my wisdom teeth. Everybody else gets them pulled out. It kind of makes me wonder, well, when are we going to get to the point and go, wait a second, them teeth ain't useless. You might need some chewing teeth, right?
Well, I was just going to say, specifically on wisdom teeth, because I got to get it out before we change. Part of my understanding of that is because our mouths get so much smaller because we don't do as much chewing. And so if you assume that's the problem, we just start chewing more. You know, they got those weird little brick things people chew on now and make the jaw look all nice and strong.
Make your jaw nice and square.
We just do that for 5 generations or so, and the wisdom teeth will just slide right in, I guess. I don't know. I'm not, there you go.
Yeah.
Pure podcast speculation on something we don't know anything about. But let's get to something we do know about, which is the leadership aspect.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say something else about the non-critical role thing of your team, because I always laugh at this, because I saw it the other day in the military bases and installations around here. And when I was stationed here, I was part of this, and it would say things like non-critical personnel report 2 hours late. And I always thought, well, damn, I thought I was pretty important. Am I critical or am I not? It's like, that's such an interesting thing that the military does. And it's the irony of it is most guys are like, well, I ain't critical, so I ain't going in. They look at it like that way, because very few of those organizations designate that. Maybe it's gotten better, but I can tell you when I was there, we all kind of looked at each other with, am I critical or are you critical? Because you know what? If I don't have to come in, I ain't coming in. So,
yeah. And actually, I think that's a great launching point for building the team. One of the things we talk about for innovation in a team, transformational leadership and that kind of stuff, is giving the freedom to the team to grow. In order to give somebody to grow and get their position to grow, you have to give them the freedom to do that and experiment and all those kind of things there. And I think there's a really interesting piece to kind of connect what we're talking about here. Because we're talking about, a business, which is a man-made system. We're using all these analogies from these natural systems that have, years of evolution to build them into these perfect systems, right? Or relatively perfect systems, I guess you could say. Human body and ecosystem, all these different analogies that people use for a team. When you have something that develops naturally inside of it, then you as the leader, then it's okay, what are we going to do to trim that back as necessary? As leaders, you do need to go in and trim out the fat of those non-necessary roles. You will probably learn that a lot of it was necessary and you're going to have to hire it back and you're going to have to grow back to that. But part of that natural process of growth in the team is a little bit of that give and take. And it's not necessarily like firing folks and that kind of thing, but of responsibilities and, things in the operational sense of, hey, Otis, you know what? I don't actually need you to spend your time doing that. And then we're going to see what happens for 3 months where you're not doing that job that you were spending your Tuesday afternoons doing. You're going to go do something else. And hey, it might turn out we needed that. And we're going to hire somebody full time to come in and take it over. And they're going to run with that role as well. And that's what that growth looks like. But you have to have this kind of process of cutting away, trimming that fat, and then letting really, I guess, the muscle grow back and see what you really need there.
Yeah, well, and there's so many parts and pieces of that, and how do you do that? How do you match that up? And I think it starts as an entrepreneur or solopreneur, because every business Really. I mean, every business, even if you got co-founders, starts with one dude who's got the idea. I don't care whether you're both sitting there drinking beer at night together and you go, "Hey, what if we did this?" You're still the guy. You're still the visionary, the one who owns that idea. And you could be partnered from day one. The the thing that we have to do in order to be successful is understanding, even as a solopreneur or co-founders, is what are those functions that I need to do, and understanding those. So what happens when you're a solopreneur is you start off just winging it because you don't know. Maybe you're reading some books, maybe you get a mentor, maybe you get a coach, maybe you hire a fractional COO to help you start to understand these things and identify them. And then as you identify them, sometimes you learn the hard way, like, oh crap, I'm supposed to pay quarterly taxes. Oh, geez. If I had an accountant, I probably would have paid my known I needed to pay quarterly taxes. In that sort of sense, you may have to pay a fine because of that, because that might be the way you learn. But my point of that is as you start to move forward in business, the functions, like you said, they're not natural. It doesn't just happen in nature. Like out there in my yard, in between those two trees, there's a business growing. No, there's not. It takes intention and foresight and effort to do that. And those things, the intention, foresight, and effort, come from the founder, the team that is running the business. Mm-hmm. And it goes into that fact of, well, what are the functions? What do we need to do? We need to monitor. We need to get clients. We need to have receive money from clients. We got to pay Uncle Sam. We got to pay anybody that might be on our team or services. All these sort of things are functions that enable the organization to continue to grow. And you can continue to use the metaphor of the body. The body is just, the human body is born with those functions, but they work together. And that's what we want our team to do as we build our business and our business grows. You start to realize as a solopreneur, much like I did, it's like, wow, man, it'd be really great if somebody was helping me out on doing some of these things. And that's why I brought you in the Tribe and Purpose team, because I have stuff I outsource. Miss Suzanne helps too, but I have stuff I outsource, and I have internal things. And it's my favorite phrase that I learned very early on after retiring from the Army is make or buy. The make or buy decision is huge as a business owner.
I think I want to push back on one thing there, saying it's not natural. I think there's this kind of thing where we use this word natural, like cells and that kind of stuff. And then I think there's this other category of natural, which is just like human, where it's like, it doesn't feel right to call it natural because we look out, like I'm looking out this Tucson landscape and all the houses and that kind of stuff. It doesn't feel right to call us natural, but there are these natural tendencies, these human tendencies that we all have and patterns we kind of follow. And I think that's where, finding the right people to put them in the right positions to where they grow into their role is where it's so key. Because just like you're talking about not necessarily getting it right, it is the growth is natural. It's going to happen. And then, if you think about it in the analogy of the human body, you talk about trimming the fat, we want it nice and lean. We want the business to run as lean as it can. Well, as it grows, you're going to get people who, they're a cancer inside the team. There's a reason we use that word, because they're just going to create all this crap around. They're going to take everything down with them. They're not, going to perform their job properly and grow properly the way the team is supposed to. You get that inside of other, man-made organizations, man-made systems too. I keep going to the economics as a really great example of, we like to point to free, especially us in America, we like to point to the free market as working in all this great way. Well, it's about as natural as it is to say that the invisible hand of economics actually knows what's happening. It doesn't. Just like, evolution doesn't know what's happening. Things just kind of tend to go a certain way based on the failures of small scale things. The reason that cancerous growth inside of the team needs to get cut out is so you can grow something else there. But you have to put those things into place to let them grow in order to see what's going to happen inside of your system. If you try to manage every little detail, talk about micromanaging inside of your business, being a really crappy leader, frankly. That's the same way of taking the economics example of going in and going, we're going to go full dictatorship. I'm controlling every price of everything. I'm going to set how much people should get paid and all these kind of things. Yeah, shoot, if you get it all right, you could get it right. Just like you could get it right inside of your business, telling
But
everyone exactly what they need.
By the way.
Exactly. And you have to get it right that one time. Exactly. And because every time you get it wrong, things are going to go wrong inside of it. That's where you have to have that mindset of the freedom, the growth to let those things happen, and then know when to trim the fat as things grow inside of there. I want to throw it over to you, though, because it's something we were talking about in the green room. The actual organizational structure. As you're designing things, it's really great to put together the natural evolution of a team, as we're talking about, and things will just grow together, Dad, and everything works out perfect. And all it's like, okay, well, no, you got to make some choices of how you want to put things in order, who wants to report to who, and those kind of things. What's the process that you've used with clients of not necessarily just identifying who you need, but how to shape those people together into the team's organizational structure?
Yeah. Except I've got something that's just eating at me in the trimming the fat.
Yeah.
And I'll do my best Arnold Schwarzenegger impersonation. Put down that cookie now. That's how you trim the fat.
Hey, I'm sure there's an example of eating a cookie that you're not supposed to be eating in a business all the time, right?
Oh yeah. But yeah, I think the organizational design is such an amazing thing because everybody gets stuck in the titles, the functions, and how they should be put together and things like that. I've had the opportunity in my career in the military. I did it four times. Started an organization from scratch. One even from a literal cocktail napkin. Literally a cocktail napkin at a bar having beer. We designed an organization that is a highly functioning and very important organization doing great things in the world now. But I think part of it is, and this is the main point I want to make is just because Acme Bricks does it this way, and they have an HR and they have an operations, they have accounts receivable, accounts payable, and they have a CFO, a COO. Just because they have all those positions doesn't mean that you need to. Doesn't mean that you have to organize your team, your business like somebody else's. You have to organize your team and your business so that it functions for your outcome to achieve your business purpose. And here's the example. One of the great examples I've got when I was doing some work in Germany, we were responsible for things going on in Europe and the European continent and things going on in the African continent. It's a lot of area, right? Mm-hmm. And we debated and discussed how to do that. Do we do it geographic? Do we do it functional? Do we do it who's close, who's kind of in the circle, who's out of the circle, all these sort of things. And eventually we looked at it and we said, well, this one makes the most sense to do it this way. And what it was companies that had external capability was one bucket, and countries that had no external, only internal capability. And that was how we organized it. Now, we organize it to achieve an in-state mission. You can do the same thing in your business because the way we organize Tribe and Purpose is not going to work for the way that you organize our good buddies at Atlas or our buddies at Lucos, or even that's a really great example. My two good friends at Lucos and Atlas Advisors, these two companies are generally speaking work in the exact same space. They're not directly competitive, but in the exact same space. But they're not organized the same. They've got different people and hierarchy and lowarchy, if you will. Nobody ever uses that word. I don't know why. They've got people in different places that help them achieve the purpose of their business, because the co-founders and founder understood what was going on. Now, where did they get these ideas from? Well, they've read a couple of books. They've got mentors and that they go to, or coaches that they go to, and they say, "What about this? How could I do this?" That's how you start. Mm-hmm. But how you create profit in your business, because that's, hey folks, knock knock. If you ain't making money, you ain't going to stay in business. I don't care how much revenue you're getting. If you're a $10 million a year company and your profit margin is $50,000, you got a problem. You might want to give us a shout and let us help you out on that. But without going down that rabbit hole, what I'm really getting to is, don't just hire people because, oh my gosh, there's a crisis today. We're short. We need some help. So you rush to hire. And a lot of times that when you do that, two things happen. One, you hire the wrong person. That's the worst part. And two, you have you realize that person or that function was it really a 40-hour a week, 50 weeks a year function? Probably not.
Yeah, I love the understanding of the purpose being so important to, like, the organizational purpose and the purpose for each individual inside of that organization. And I think once you start to understand that, you can piece it together a lot better of, understanding where people need to go, what those roles can look like, and those kind of things. I think the interesting piece there, you start to think about the actual hierarchy. Because there is, again, we're kind of getting back to there, and I don't think this is a wrong way to put it necessarily, Dad, but, we're kind of going back to that, like, well, it naturally grows type thing. So to try to apply a little bit of, formula to it, then as you start to look at those things, you look at the purpose and each individual's purpose and how those relate to each other, how those operations check in and how often they need to be working together. To use a great example of teams, you talk about how each different business is different, even if they're, or look the same functionality wise and those kind of things. The organizations look completely different. You can look at a sport, right? Look at rugby. Every team has the same purpose. We're here to score tries, right? That's all we're here to do. And, some teams look at that and score more tries than the other team. Some teams look at that and say, we're just going to play defense. We'll score 3 points and we won't even score a try. We're just going to completely shut them out and have that approach. Some teams go completely offense and they don't even play defense. Watch some MLR. You'll see a lot of that. There's this balance where it's like completely different ways of looking at things. Then inside of it, you have the personality of each of those organizations too. If you come out to a U of A practice, we're playing music before, we have games that we play before we get started in practice. We're at University of Arizona in Tucson. We know what we are, right? There's a little bit of a personality that goes with that, and you play into it a little bit. You have to have that with your business as well. We talk about the gold standard for, team bonding and all that kind of stuff and employee engagement and happiness of Google, right? And it's the ping pong tables and it's this. Well, it's like, yeah, if you got people that want to play ping pong, then that's a pretty good way to get them to buy into it. But you got to understand what kind of organization you're working with and how those pieces all fit together. Then, as you get into the individual jobs there, I'd like to think about it in terms of an office layout is the kind of way I keep playing with this. Because you get this in the rugby field of, the positions. And if you're near each other, you probably should work together more. You could say, if you go through the lineup, number 1 and number 15, a prop and a fullback don't need to practice together near as much as, a prop and a hooker, right? Or a prop and another prop. There's connections there. So you start to go through that and it's like, okay, sales and marketing, the classic example where, old organizational hierarchies, they don't let those connect at all. So we, as people who understand that, then go, okay, hey, connect those two. Well, how often do they need to be talking? And it's like, okay, well, they should be in the same wing of the building, probably not share an office. It's like, okay, cool. Perfect. How about the two people in marketing together? The person working on, traditional marketing methods, sending out newsletters, all that kind of stuff, and the person doing social media marketing. So, okay, perfect. They should be in the same office. All right, good. Then what about the person doing operations? It's okay, well, they don't really need to be in the same office. And you can kind of map it out like that visually of where these people are, how often they should be running into each other. And that kind of gives you a little bit of what that organizational hierarchy looks like. Then I think, and I want to throw this over to you then, the question becomes, of the actual leadership, the hierarchy behind the organization. What I kind of just covered was basically how you design like the grouping and how you put people together for, the functionality purposes. But what about who's actually in charge? What about who's making those decisions? I want to throw that over to you. How do you set up that part of the organization?
Yeah. Well, I go back to my experience in the special ops. In the special ops world, we were very different in how we organized when we went into the fight. So when we're not, and this part doesn't apply to business, at least it shouldn't.
Don't cut out the war stories, Dad. That's what the people are here for.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, but when we're back home in Garrison, we had our functions. You had the HR, the J1, the personnel, the intelligence, the operations, the logistics, the planning. We had that, right? But when we deployed on a mission, we would create these centers, and we called log center, log cen, and op cen, operations center and logistics center. Mm-hmm. And what we would do is we would have in the operations center, which was the hub of all activity that, directed the missions, issued the missions, monitored the missions, even did some of the planning, the near-term planning, because we'd also have a planning cell that was a satellite of the operations center. And then the log center, taking care of the beans and bullets, but the log center had a guy who sat in the operations center and vice versa. And the operations center wasn't just operations. It was operations. It was intelligence. It was logistics. Like I mentioned, the planning. They were all there because we operated as what I call a matrix organization. And a matrix organization, think of it like projects. When you have a project, as the project manager, you're running the project and you get assets and resources from the stakeholders involved in the project. Thank you very much, Scott Kinder. Bonus points. You get those guys in there, and they don't belong to you. I don't, I don't have generally speaking, I don't have a hire fire capability of those people. They're they're providing a specific function so that we could accomplish the project. Very similar to an operations center, logistics center, like we did in special forces. Mm-hmm. So back to the organizational design of your business, who's in charge of that? Well, the way we did it, so you have the commander's in charge of everything. So think CEO, he's in charge of all the centers, however many they are. He's responsible for everything. Then the operations center was run by, generally speaking, the operations officer. Think chief operating officer, the guy who's responsible for the day-to-day things. The op cen was his responsibility, or is. And then the logistics center was run by our executive officer. And in the Army, the executive officer is the guy who's focused on the logistics, the beans and bullets. And that was how we delineated. So your logistics, your APAR world, your whatever those other things are called when you're ordering stuff and getting things in, maybe that's probably not your CFO. CFO doesn't really fit into a military structure, but somebody who is running that. And you may have, because, oh, by the way, one thing I left out that's very important is where's the personnel people? Well, they're in the logistics center because they're providing the people to the operation, right? So maybe your HR director. But I think the point of this is there's no set document. There's all these books behind me that talk about different things in military operations, business, philosophy, all these. And you can pick up any one of these books behind me, and especially the business ones, and it'll tell you, here's the structure. Well, that's the structure for that situation. Yeah. You, as the CEO founder, your job is to design it the best way that you can, your best guess moving forward, so that you can accomplish and accomplish the purpose of your business and be successful.
I think one thing that keeps coming to mind is the size factor is one of the few things that you really can almost like set a rule for inside of a team, which is, it's like, well, when do you need a leader, like a true defined leadership role? And, in the business, it's basically, are there enough man hours in the followers below that leader, to put it that way, that this person can take that over, and it is going to boost that team's production by taking it off their plate. A lot of the time, you don't need that. A lot of the time, you can have a pretty flat hierarchy in these smaller teams within the business, because it comes down to just the amount of people there. You can't have a flat hierarchy for an entire organization, because then at some point you're going to have 10 people on a meeting that needed one person. And you're going to have all these sorts of things like that aren't going to quite work right, because you're not giving people enough ownership in their own areas. They're all constantly trying to collaborate with those. And I think really, the more I've thought about this, and we've talked about it more off podcast, actually, I think, when it comes to the organizational structures, because of some personal examples, but the like flat hierarchy, the intention there is that you want people to collaborate. You don't want people to feel belittled, all those kind of things. Those are functions of toxic management. Those aren't functions of leaders and leadership roles by definition. You have to understand what those things are and tease them out. By having a boss does not mean you have an asshole as a boss. Those are very different things. The best leaders still occupy the same position as the worst bosses. It's not necessarily the position that is doing anything. It's about the individual inside of that position. You talk about having a flat organization, those small teams. You have 5 people in that team. They can all be flat. You're still going to have one person who is either literally titled that or is going to naturally become the leader there, because that's how it works inside of a small group. So it winds up working with that. And you can have people connecting those different areas. You can recognize all of those different things. But the numbers are such a key aspect there for it, of how effective can that be. It's great to have everybody collaborating, but if you have 7, 8 people collaborating on a project, it's much less effective than having 3 or 4 of the right people collaborating on the project. And maybe you need to pull someone in every now and then, those kind of things. And again, going back to that idea of the flat hierarchy, the limit there that people think that they think is a problem in traditional hierarchies is this idea of like not having communication. Well, what if I need something from Otis, but he's not my boss? Well, then freaking call Otis. Do you have a culture, a personality inside of your organization where people feel they can't do that? Okay, well then yes, you should probably set it up that way so that nobody feels that way. But if you have a really good organization, it doesn't matter who the leader is necessarily by title, because it's going to function properly inside of the systems that have evolved inside of that team. Which is why, going back to, you have to understand the purpose. You have to kind of let it grow naturally, trim that fat where needed, and keep things on track as the organization grows, because you don't have all the answers, right?
Yeah. Well, those stovepipes are a huge problem with businesses. As your business grows, and I always like to use the metaphor of when we first start off, we're all sitting around the kitchen table, and there's constant interchange of information. And even if we're not talking directly to each other, you're still overhearing the conversation. And it's a natural flow, communications flow. What happens is a business starts to grow, and now guess what? We're making money. So let's move out of my kitchen and go get us some office space. And now all of a sudden the four key people, the 4 people that were, the founder and the first 3 hires are sitting in separate offices. And that natural just BS, the water cooler type of talk doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
And that communication starts to break down. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like in person, this example, really, really simple example comes to mind, of, you can take this business or person, whatever, in a small setting. If you came visited Tucson again, thanks for coming, by the way, and you're sitting in the recliner right there, we're working there, and I'm working at my desk, and I get something that's like a crappy email or something comes up, or like I'm doing a redesign on the website, let's say, that's a better, real example. And I hit some bug on a dude on our builder, and I just completely lose it. That's something that on a normal day when you're in Colorado, you don't hear anything about, because I keep that in my silo, because it doesn't really need to go over to you. But if you're right there, I go, shit. And that's all it takes. And you can jump in and we can go, and maybe you help me, maybe you don't. But like, that's what you're talking about there. In a small organization, you hear the or whatever it is, and people will jump on that and they'll be able to help you then. And I think then that goes back to recognizing how often do you need those kind of things, and that's how you can group up your business so you can have some of those interactions possible. And yeah, I just wanted to get that point in there. I'll throw it back to you. Maybe wrap it.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's true, and that's the advantage of it, and that's something you lose, and you have to understand that you're losing it. And there was a time period about 5 years ago, and it lasted for probably about 10 years, maybe 15, where it was the whole open office concept, kind of like we're watching HGTV, right? Look at our open concept. That's what we're trying to do in offices. And what we realized was it's hard as hell to work next to somebody like me who has a telephone voice. And I get on the telephone and I start to talk loud. I feel sorry. I used to always feel sorry when I was in CubeLand in one company. I always felt sorry for my Cube neighbors, because they knew that they told me eventually, they're like, yeah, I could tell you were on the phone, Otis. And generally I just get up and go get a cup of coffee and kill some time until you were off the phone, because, there's give and take in that sort of environment. So, when there's just 4 of you sitting around the table, that makes sense. Yeah. But when there's 20 of you out in the space, because I got CubeLand right out here, fictitious CubeLand. You got 20 of you sitting out there in just this open space, because I've been in those offices. It's hard to stay focused. Yeah. So
I want to throw something out, actually. So interesting thing I heard from a friend of mine. She was telling me about a study around having like fences and like front yards and these kind of things. And one of the interesting thing in the study basically was that if you have fences, if you have walls, people tend to be happier and nicer to their neighbors, more connected with their neighbors in those kind of a setting. And it's because you have your sense of privacy. I think you have your security with that. And so you feel more open being out with people. Whereas if you don't have that security, you kind of, keep things a little bit closer to the chest, because you're, constantly feeling that scrutiny from the neighbors. So you don't want to go out as much. And I joked with her, and this wasn't part of the study, but, the way my brain works is like, well, what's the happy medium? You see it all the time here in Tucson, the half walls out front. And it's like, okay, well, maybe you need a half wall in your office. Maybe you need some people to have their space and have their private areas where they can go have their loud phone calls. But then you still need something to bring them out in that kind of aspect of it. I think there's a lot to be said to kind of connect those two pieces of psychology there when it comes to the literal design of the office, which I guess makes sense for us to talk about to wrap up the conversation about organizational structure and all those kind of things, right? Get to the literal structure.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the physical layout of the place, and depending on your team and depending on what you're doing, depending on the design of the organization and the design of the office space, the workspace, the shop. Mm-hmm. How do you design it so it's functional? And what I learned is, the prop and the 15, I was thinking about that. So the number 1 and number 15, folks. So guy who does the heavy lifting, guy who does all the pretty running and kicking.
Yep.
And when you said that, I was like, well, no, that's not true. And then I started to think back to running our teams, and a lot of times you take this group of guys and you put them over here, and you take this group of the team and you put them over there, and they do their functional things.
Yeah.
But in order for the team to be successful, those two groups, if you will, have to learn how to function together. So you can't discount that, because otherwise you're back to what I was talking about earlier, stovepipes, and you have stovepipes on the rugby pitch, which is not a successful way to play rugby. No, that's what I learned. Camden, how about you?
And maybe this isn't accurate, so you can feel free to push back or add to this. But if you're talking about the cocktail napkin idea in the context of designing a new team or organization while you're serving as a Green Beret, it just has me thinking that's how most of y'all's stuff sounds. Same for the SEALs and all that. When you hear like, what does a Green Beret do? And it's like, oh, well, we're going to go live in the woods and watch these people for 6 months, and we're going to do all of these little tiny things, and that's going to solve the war. It's like, all right, Otis. That sounds like you wrote it on the back of a cocktail napkin. You know what I mean? You talk about Rangers jumping in to the airport and all this kind of stuff. All of those functions of you special operators sound like it was written on the back of a cocktail napkin after about 4 or 5 beers, I'd say.
And usually preceded by, hey, y'all, watch this.
Yes, sir.
So I just want to say, if you want to learn about how to organize your business, we've got, and you're listening to one of those options right now, we've got 3 great ways that you can grow your business, make sure that you organize for effectiveness and efficiency so that you can have profit to continue to grow and be successful. And that is, first off, the Tribe and Purpose Leadership Development System. That's our done with you. The second one is our fractional COOs, and that is done for you. We bring in a fractional COO and help make sure that your business is organized and run those operations and create those systems and processes and the culture of success so that you can launch the next level of growth in your business. And then number 3, like I said, you're listening to it here, the DIY. This, when you listen to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis, that is where you're going to get the resources and the information so that you can grow your business by yourself. But don't hesitate to put your hand up and give us a call. Don't be that person that thinks you can keep treading water by yourself. Put your hand up and let somebody throw a safety ring out to you, maybe a safety line, pull you up ashore. So go to 10xyourteam.net to learn more. Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes is available at www.10xyourteam.net, right alongside all those other great resources you just mentioned and some other stuff you didn't even mention. So go check it out, folks. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.